سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح، تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح. يا حرفا تراقص في اغتيالي، وأنشد زاهيا بين التلال، لدار العلم يصدح في سمو.
And there's no doubt that Islam encourages the use of intellect and mind and reasoning. And this is seen in the first verses which were revealed in the Quran. So there's no question, because the first verses revealed in the Quran was recite. And you know that in Islam when you read or recite, it's coupled with understanding. And understanding is from the actions of the mind. So there's no doubt that our deen, it promotes thought, it promotes reasoning. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has praised thought and He's praised reasoning and reflection. And if you look at our history, our Islamic history, you'll find that unlike other religions, other civilizations, our civilization, when it was religious, when it excelled, our civilization was religious, it excelled in worldly knowledge. And that is a historical fact. So our religion, our civilization, when it was religious, it also excelled in the knowledge of this, the worldly knowledge. And if you look at other civilizations, it was the opposite. When it was religious, if you look at Christianity, when they were religious, they were known to be in the Dark Ages or the Middle Ages. Only when it separated religion, separated religion and knowledge, then, or only when the church was overtook, then they were able to advance in knowledge, in worldly knowledge. And that's when the Reformation took place, when they separated religion from worldly knowledge. Brothers and sisters, we are the only civilization in history of mankind, of humankind, that we reach the heights, when we reach the heights of religiosity, we also excelled in our worldly affairs. And as you all know, in those golden stages of Islam, our civilization excelled. We were the ones that charted out the course of the human body. And if you study astronomy, most of the stars have names derived from Arabic. And we invented the science of algebra. And all of this is known to you. Our intellect or reason is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with, has blessed humans with over other creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you look at the animal kingdom, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not blessed them with the type of intellect that humankind have. They do not have the type of reason that we possess. Even though Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed us with the aql, the intellect, yet at the same time the aql is not all powerful and it is not infallible. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed humanity with aql, intellect. But yet we must realize that our intellect is not all powerful and infallible. Any attribute that you have, in your hand, it has a certain reach. It has a limitation to it. Your eyesight has a certain reach. It has a certain limit to it. Beyond a certain distance, you will not able to see beyond a certain distance. Your step, your voice, beyond a certain range, your voice does not go beyond. The sound does not travel beyond it. Likewise, the mind. The mind, the human mind, has a limit to it. And that limit, when it is crossed, when you try to cross that limit, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed on the human intellect, then, and only then, you fall into error. You go into dangerous grounds. It's just like, for example, if you look at Islamic history, you look at some of the groups that have emerged in Islamic history, and whenever you study Islamic history, the sects in Islam, you find that there are always two extremes. Always two extremes. So let's say, for example, take the Qadariyah. The Qadariyah, and all of these groups, subhanAllah, you find one common trait, and that is that they put before the Quran and Sunnah the intellect. And they transgress the bounds that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has set for reasoning, for human reasoning. So if you look at the Qadariyah, who had that trait, what did they fall into? They fell into Sheikh. How? Because they said that man, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does not know things which are to happen only after it has happened. They say that things are unuf. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not know that I was going to pick this tablet up only after I picked it up. That's the Qadariyah. They say man is in full control of his actions. Allah does not know what you're going to do unless after it has happened. That's the first extreme. And they use their intellect. Okay? They say that God, Allah, his characteristics that He does not force individuals. Okay? The Jabariyah, the opposing, they say the opposite. They say, you are forced into your actions. They oppose the Qadariyah. They say you oppose, that you are forced into actions. You are forced to sit down. I'm forced to stand in front of you and to give a talk about the intellect. I'm forced into these actions. Okay, and they use their intellect to come to that conclusion. Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they always find the middle path. They always find the middle path. So these groups that you see in Islam, or whenever you study in your Sharia colleges that you have about groups, know that a common trait between all of them is that they put forward their intellect before the text, the naql, which is the Quran and Sunnah. Now, we live in a time, brothers and sisters, that many people think that intellect is what reigns supreme. That we live in a time, if our intellect and rational thought and reasoning, if we come to a conclusion that reasoning is correct, because we came to that conclusion using our intellect, we don't care about what the religious texts say. This is the attitude of the environment that we live in. We don't care what the Quran mentions. We don't look at the hadith, what it contains. Our intellect, we say, should surpass both of them. And this type of thinking, brothers and sisters, without a doubt, is something we as Muslims disagree with. We disagree with this. So someone might say that Islam is incompatible with the intellect? Are you saying that Islam is incompatible with the intellect? Are you saying that Islam is challenged intellectually? And that the Quran and Sunnah opposes intellect and reason? Are you saying this? The answer is no. However, there are certain guidelines that Allah has placed. Just like with anything. You study any Islamic sciences, what do you study first? The principles of those sciences. You study the sciences of hadith. For example, you study, what are the first things that you take? The conditions, the principles. You study the sciences of tafsir. You take the principles, how to do tafsir. What's the methodology of doing tafsir? You study fiqh. You take the principles first. Why are these principles placed by the scholars of Islam? So you don't fall into error and deviation. Likewise, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed guidelines around the use of your intellect. So you don't fall into error. You don't fall into deviation or mistakes. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the Quran tells humankind to use their intellect. And of the places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells mankind to use the intellect is that in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages people to use reason and intellect when He challenges them, those who do not believe in Him, the non-Muslims. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them to use their intellect, those who do not believe in them, to come to a logical and rational conclusion, because they don't believe in the Quran. They don't believe in the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them to use their thought and reasoning to come to the conclusion that this universe has only one creator, and that is Allah, who is the one and only worthy of worship. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in many places of the Quran, أَوَلَمْ يَتَفَكَّرُوا فِي أَنفُسِهِمْ, that do they not think and ponder about themselves? Examine yourself. See and ponder and reflect and reason that no one else could have created what you see around yourself, your body, the environment around you. Is there any other God, any other being that created all of this? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them to look at the world around them. And He mentions that, does this not make sense? That you think that there's multiple creators? No, there's only one creator. And how does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourage them to come to that conclusion? By using their thought, their intellect, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gifted them. So using intellect leads them to Tawheed. Leads them to Tawheed. This is the first, category of verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises or uses or encourages people to use intellect. Of the places that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells humankind to use intellect is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges the people to look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and come to a conclusion that he was a prophet. Again, this is directed to the non-Muslims. The first category was to non-Muslims. Second category also to those who do not believe in the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. To look at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that in the Quran. To look at his lifestyle, his seerah, examine his seerah. Did the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was he after money? No, because the Quraysh were offering him the wealth of Mecca, but he did not take that. Was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was he after fame? How could he be after fame? If you study his seerah, how could he be after fame when he was preaching preaching an unpopular message? So he was unpopular because he was preaching it to the pagan Arabs. They were idol worshippers. So how could he be after fame when he's going against the popular message? Was he after power? Once again, the Quraysh offered him that, but he did not take it. So what was the Prophet ﷺ preaching? And not only that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also tells us that where is the Prophet ﷺ getting all of this knowledge from? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Quraysh. You think, where is he getting this knowledge from? First of all, he, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, as you all know, was unlettered. Did not know how to read and write. And Mecca did not have a library. Most of them were unlettered. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the people of Makkah, ponder, think, where did the Prophet ﷺ get all of these message, all of this information from? The stories of the previous prophets, the story of Prophet Yunus and the whale. The Makkans, the pagan Arabs did not know about Yunus and the whale. So where did the Prophet ﷺ receive all of these information from? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenges them in the Quran. And even the stories of Christianity. The stories of Christianity. Where is the Prophet ﷺ getting this message from? If you look at it, the Quran and His subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of you know the story of Isa alayhi salam. It's mentioned in the Quran that he fashioned birds and gave them life with the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of you know that story. That's mentioned in the Quran. However, this was not mentioned in the sources of Christianity. It was not mentioned in these sources of Christianity. It was discovered recently 150 years ago in Egypt. Old manuscripts of Christianity, sects of Christianity which no longer exist. In them, subhanAllah, there were stories about Isa alayhi salam giving life to birds by the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is not mentioned in any of the books of the Bible. But the Quran mentioned it 14 centuries ago. He says, I exhort you, I ask of you one thing, and that is, أَن تَقُومُوا لِلَّهِ. Stand up for the sake of Allah. Do not be biased. Stand up for the sake of Allah. Work. Work for what? Stand up in pairs, in groups, singular, mathna, or in pairs, or singular, and do what? ثُمَّ تَتَفَكَّرُوا. And think. Get together and think. Reason. Use your intellect. Use your mind. And see the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That was he really a madman? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is encouraging the pagans of Mecca to stand up. Get into your groups. Get into pairs. Or by yourselves and do what? Think. Reason. Use your intellect. Look at the message of this man. And then come to a conclusion. Was he really a madman? So again, this is another category of verses where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages humankind to use their intellect. Once again, to come to the conclusion of Tawheed. Because belief in the Prophet Messenger, or the prophethood of the Prophet Muhammad is part of Tawheed. Third place where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to use our intellect, thought and reason is for the believers. All of you know the verse where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says the believers are those who remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala lying down in any state. And what do? They think about the heavens. They ponder and reflect about the great creations of Allah. And one of the greatest creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the heavens. Ponder. The believers ponder about the creation of the heavens and the earth. And what does this pondering or reflection and this use of intellect do for the believers? It increases them in their iman. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran, that the believers are those when the Quran is recited to them and the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioned to them, their hearts tremble with fear, and this recitation and the mentioning of Allah's verses increases them in their iman. So for the believer, when he's pondering and using intellect, this gift that Allah has given, what's it meant to do? It's meant to increase your iman in Him. Of the places where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala encourages us to use our intellect is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks us to ponder upon the meaning of the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, where He has revealed the Quran in the Arabic language, in simple Arabic, so that we may ponder and reflect upon the Quran. And never Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tells us to use our intellect to challenge the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to use the intellect to come to the conclusion of Tawheed. Never Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran to use the intellect to challenge the Quran. And the Quran is the word of Allah. And we Muslims, subhanAllah, some verses that when we recite, doesn't matter what verses they may be, we start questioning. Oh, this is not logically possible. This goes against reason. How can Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention this in the Quran? Especially when it comes to the hudud, the punishments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And other things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has mentioned in the Quran, we start challenging them. We say, no, we're living in a time when we must change the meaning of this to something else. So never does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us to use our intellect to change the Quran. The Quran is perfect. The words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are perfect. Because the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the beliefs of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah is that the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, all of them, they have reached the highest level of perfection. And His speech is an attribute. The Quran is an attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it's reached the highest level of perfection. So for you to come and see these verses and say, look, these verses, I don't agree with them, because my reason doesn't allow me to. And what you're trying to do is that you're trying to use your intellect, which is imperfect, to challenge something which is perfect. Because everyone agrees that your intellect is imperfect. Yeah? So how can a person stand up and use something which is imperfect to challenge something which is perfect? You're going to fall into distortion and deviation, just like the groups of Islam did. The sects of Islam, if you study the sects of Islam, that's what they did. So never does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell us to use our intellect to challenge the Quran and the Sunnah. Even the Sunnah. Because the Sunnah is a form of revelation, divine revelation. That German scientist, all of you know, that he rejected the hadith in Sahih Bukhari about the fly. The fly, when it dips into the water, and you dip the fly completely, he rejected that hadith. Why? Because his reasoning did not allow him to accept it. But then later on he discovered that the fly, it carries the antidote of the diseases that it has. And then he believed in that hadith. He recalled that hadith back. Now, but the thing is, before he came to that conclusion, did that change the reality of the hadith? Did that change the fact? No, it didn't. It didn't change the fact. So his intellect caused him to reject a hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is divine, which is a divine revelation. So see what the intellect can lead you to, brothers and sisters. And your intellect, if it's not used within the guidelines of the Sharia, it will lead you to reject the Quran and the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, just like the groups. It's everything, as I say, is they go around in circles. History repeats itself. Same thing, nothing new. The modern day, Muslims, the secular Muslims, and all of that garbage that exists. What are they doing? Is that same thing. They're putting their intellect, just like the people of Kalam in our history, before the Quran and Sunnah. And what does it lead them to? That Islam needs reformation. that Islam needs to change. That Islam needs to change. This person's a fool. Why? Because Islam, in the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, as we mentioned, is perfect. If something is perfect, it doesn't need to evolve. And that's what they're calling for. So if you put those people that put their intellect before the naql, which is the Quran and Sunnah, it will lead you into thinking that this Islam, it needs to be changed to suit your intellect. Okay. Now, brothers and sisters, in conclusion, I'd like to say that the purpose of the intellect in the Quran and in our Sharia is, and if you look at it, the intellect, the meaning of the intellect and mind is what? Aql. And the Arabic word for it is aqala, which means to rein an animal in, and to pull it back, to restrain it. So when you pull it back, when you pull the animal back, the horse back, for example, that is the meaning of the verb aqala. And from that we get into the cut. What's the connection between the two? Is that intellect. What does human intellect have to do with reining something in? Restraining something. Is that the purpose of the intellect is to restrain you, is to rein you in times of danger. That is the purpose of the intellect. It is to rein you in, and that's why most of us, when we commit sin, we say, "I wasn't thinking." Why? Because you didn't use your intellect that Allah gave you. That's why, many brothers who start practicing Islam, when they speak about their days, what do they say? Days of ignorance. Yeah, days of ignorance, days of jahiliyyah. Ignorance means the absence of your intellect. Okay. So, the aql in the Arabic language means to restrain or to rein something in. And your aql, your intellect, is a gift that Allah has given you to rein you in, to restrain you, to hold you back from the dangers that surround it. And if you stop, or if intellect is not there, you will act like a fool. So aql is something that pulls you back from things which are foolish. That's why you say to someone who's doing the wrong thing, use your brain, brother, use your head. That's what it means. Because if you don't, you'll fall into error and mistakes. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Mulk, that the people of Jahannam, when they're asked, why did they go to Jahannam? What's their reason? That we did not use our intellect. That we didn't use the aql that Allah gave us. They could be scientists, they could be doctors, they could be, lawyers. But they're in Jahannam. And their reason for them being in Jahannam is they did not use their intellect. So in Islam, finally, in conclusion, in Islam, the intellectual person, the smart person, is the one who worships Allah. The smart or the intellectual person is the person who worships Allah. And the person who does not worship Allah can have as many PhDs in any science of this dunya, he is not intellectual. Because the outcome is that if he doesn't believe in Allah, he's failed, he's in Jahannam. As where a person, a faqir, for example, did not have any education from this dunya, however, he worshipped Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, had the knowledge to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's in Jannah, and that is the greatest success. This is the intellectual person. So this is the purpose of the intellect in Islam. Jazakumullah khair, brothers and sisters. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.
سبيل الدموع سبيل مريح تنهدى يا صاحي كي تستريح